There are new allegations of NSA snooping online. Washington Post reports that the NSA staffers have been secretly tapping into Google and Yahoo data centers, snagging emails, video chats, and more. And the NSA chief, he denied these claims.
Those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither.
If you have your email somewhere like Gmail, hosted on a server overseas or transferred overseas, or at any time crosses outside the borders of the United States, ends up in the database.
You've all heard the rhetoric about the September 11th terrorist attacks being the result of an enormous intelligence failure. According to the government, the lack of knowledge about the impending attack made it impossible for U.S. national security to act preemptively and decisively. Of course, since then, an entire industry has been created to bolster the already enormous security and surveillance state. What if the attacks were not just an intelligence failure? The contrary to the official narrative, sufficient intelligence was available that should have prevented the attacks.
Even if you send it to somebody within the United States, your wholly domestic communication between you and your wife can go from New York to London and back and get caught up in the database.
Well, the information that they're gathering is new because we're dealing with companies that in the past have been subjected by court order to provide this information, but here there's allegedly no permission.
And I think we're seeing something amazing. If you ask the American people to make tough decisions, to confront tough issues, to think about hard problems, they'll actually surprise you.
I do not care what the NSA does. You know, honestly, unless I'm like a criminal or planning someone's murder, why does it matter? Who cares?
You know, after Edward Snowden revealed what the NSA was doing, a lot of Americans made the argument that, hey, you know what, this isn't really that big of a deal. If you're not doing anything shady or salacious, you have nothing to worry about if you're not breaking the law. But the reality is, we need to stop thinking about how this impacts us personally, and we need to think about how this will destroy certain things in a broader scope.
What's up, everybody? Doc Brown here. We are looking into the conspiracy aspect of COVID-19. This is Dr. Lee. He was the original whistleblower there in China. Dr. Lee is was an ophthalmologist. On December 30th, he decided to post on social media that people need to start wearing their PPE due to a SARS-like infection. 4 days later, the police summoned Dr. Lee and forced him to sign a letter that accused him of making false comments that had severely disrupted the social order. The police also said that he was one of 8 people under investigation. He died on February 7th, 2020, from COVID-19. His parents also sounds like they died from COVID. Chinese scientists in America, there were 3 researchers that had links to China that lied about it. One of them was Harvard Department Chair Charles Leiber. He was accused of lying about his connections to China while the researchers were charged with being foreign agents. Mr. Leiber allegedly accepted more than $1 million in grant money from the Chinese government. Cancer researcher Zhaosong Xing was arrested at Boston Logan International Airport with 21 vials of biological samples in his bag. Prosecutors alleged that he was planning to return to China and continue his research there. Up in Canada, there were some more Chinese scientists. In March of 2019, a mysterious event happened where there was a shipment of exceptionally virulent viruses from Canada's National Microbiology Lab ended up in China. The event caused a major scandal in the biowarfare community, with experts questioning why Canada would just send off lethal viruses to China. The scientists from the NML said that it was highly likely that the viruses were lethal and potentially could be used as a bioweapon. Following the investigation, the incident was traced to Chinese agents working for the NML. 4 months later, in July of 2019, a group of Chinese virologists were forcibly dispatched from the Canadian National Microbiology Lab. The NML is Canada's only level 4 lab and only one of a few in North America. Dr. Yu is married to another Chinese scientist, Dr. Sheng, and they are both affiliated with the NML. Specifically, Dr. Shen is involved with the Science and Technology Corps and is primarily a bacteriologist, but has switched to virology. The couple is responsible for infiltrating the Canadian lab with many Chinese agents as students, ranging from a range of Chinese scientific facilities directly tied to China's biological warfare program. Some of them were the Institute of Military Veterinary, the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the Institute of Microbiology, just to name a couple. The Wuhan Level 4 lab, this is the one that we keep hearing about in the news. I'm still a little bit behind on all of my study of this whole developing story from, starting in November. I'm a couple weeks behind still on catching up, but Wuhan Institute of Virology is still one of the major points, as far as I can tell. The People Liberations Army top biological warfare Major General Shen Wei was dispatched to Wuhan at the end of January in order to help the effort to contain the outbreak. Danny Shoam is a former Israeli military intelligence officer who studied the Chinese biological warfare. He said that the institute is linked to Beijing's covert biological weapons program. What that means is that the facilities are both military as well as civilian. Keep in mind as well that the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been known to sell the animals that, when they're done being test dummies, whether dead or alive, and they have sold the animals to that wet market. Recently, I just learned that the bats that they are claiming the virus is from, there are none naturally within, I think it was 300 miles. Is that what I said the other day, Radar? He's not paying attention. I think it was 300 miles around the wet market. But they do use them in the Wuhan Institute of Virology as well as the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention is even closer than the Wuhan lab to the wet market. The Wuhan lab studied the coronavirus in the past, including the strain that causes severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, H5N1, influenza, Chinese encephalitis, and dengue. Researchers at the institute also studied the germ that causes anthrax, which is a biological agent that was once developed by Russia. In 1993, China declared a second facility, the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products. This was one of 8 biological warfare research facilities covered by the BWC, or Biological Weapons Convention. China joined that in 1985. This is a map showing where the wet market is. That should say wet market, not seafood market, because there's non-seafood there as well. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology. As you can see, it's about 20 miles away over a major river, and maybe those are creeks. So to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what the Bioweapons Treaty is, the Biological Weapons Convention, or the BWC, is a legally binding treaty that outlaws biological arms. After being discussed and negotiated with the United Nations Disarmament Forum starting in 1969, the BWC opened for signature on April 10th, 1972, and entered into force on March 26, 1975. It currently has 183 country participants. The BWC bans the development, stockpile, acquisition, retention, and production of biological agents and toxins of types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. It also bans weapons, equipment, delivery vehicles designed to use such agents or toxins for hostile purposes or in armed conflict. The transfer of or assistance with acquiring the agents, toxins, weapons, equipment, or delivery vehicles. Iraq violated its commitments as a signatory state with a biological weapons program, which was uncovered by the UN Special Council on Iraq after the Persian Gulf War. Iraq became a state party after the war. In 2001, the United States publicly accused Iraq, as well as North Korea, of breaching the convention's terms. In 2017, a report on the compliance with the BWC, the United States indicated that Russia was the only state to have outstanding compliance issues with the BWC, aka they're not compliant. So this study here was super controversial, and due to political pressure, was pulled shortly after it was released. It came out of India. It wasn't peer-reviewed at the time. It came out on January 31st, 2020. Oh, excuse me, hiccups. More recently, it sounds like people are starting to look at the study and looking at all the evidence and kind of agreeing with it. So basically what happened was the scientists took the virus, looked at it, did some studying up on it, and they found that the evolution of, the study calls it the 2019 novel coronavirus, which now we know is COVID-19. The evolution of it remains elusive, which is a clade, which means doesn't really have an ancestry. They found 4 insertions in the spike glycoprotein, which are unique to COVID-19 and are not present in other coronaviruses. That is pretty big. The amino acid residues in all 4 inserts have identity or similarity to those of HIV-1. The finding of the 4 unique inserts of COVID-19 all of which have identity or similarity to amino acid residues, in key structural proteins of HIV is unlikely to be accidental in nature. What that means is it's not likely to happen more than once. Just within the last month or so, I don't know how big it is at home yet, or if at all, but COVID-19 has mutated, like in the game Pandemic, and it now has a second strain of COVID-19. So it's mutated and starting to branch. They don't know how deadly the new branch is yet. We'll find out with time, I suppose. Dr. Francis Boyle. He's a pretty smart dude from everything that I've gathered. He's a professor of international law at the University of Illinois College of Law. He drafted the U.S. domestic implementation legislation for the Biological Weapons Convention, also known as Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989. This bill was unanimously passed by both houses of Congress and signed into law by George H.W. Bush, aka Bush 1. Dr. Boyle believes that the virus is potentially lethal and an offensive biological warfare weapon or dual-use biowarfare weapons agent genetically modified with gain-of-function properties. If you're in the camp that believe that we can't genetically modify germs, you're definitely wrong. GMOs are genetically modified organisms. We eat them all the time. The whole idea behind GMOs, like corn, was so that we could grow more food faster and be more nutritious, so that way we could feed the third world and the starving much easier. So it's not an unlikely jump that we could manufacture or alter a germ. Dr. Boyle also believes that this is why the government of China originally tried to cover it up and is now taking drastic measures to contain it. Recently, we have not seen any new numbers of infection from China, and yet the death rate still rises, and no other country in the world has started to see curbing numbers. Everybody is still going up. As you probably know, the United States recently took over the #1 slot for infections in the world. Senator Tom Cotton also agrees with Dr. Boyle. He said, "I would note that Wuhan also has China's only biosafety safety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens, to include, yes, coronavirus. China claimed for almost 2 months that coronavirus had originated in a Wuhan seafood market. This is not the case. He misspeaks here when he uses the term seafood. It was a wet market. There's a difference, like I had mentioned. He also said a study published demonstrating that of the original 40 cases, 14 of them had no contact with the seafood market. Again, misspeaking, including patient 0. They don't know who patient 0 is, still to my knowledge. Stock sell-offs. These are just a couple of people from Congress that decided to sell off some stocks. Republicans Richard Burr, Kelly Loeffler, and James Infor, as well as Democrat Dianne Feinstein. Raiders over there banging things around. Sorry about that. Loeffler made 27 sales worth between $1.275 million and $3.1 million just before the market took a nosedive. Yesterday when I was looking, it looked like it was back over 20,000, but when it took a dive, it ended up down in the 19,000 range. We're almost at 30,000 as far as the Dow Jones goes, anyway. Sorry, brain fart. Dumped up to $3.1 million in investments, like I mentioned in the previous statement. Starting the day of the Senate Health Committee, which she sits on, was briefed by the CDC. Meanwhile, Mr. James over here sold some stocks worth $400,000, including some real estate. Senator Burr, he is the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee that was directly briefed on the coronavirus. He sold up to $1.7 million in stocks, including hotels, according to some publications. Dianne Feinstein, also a member of the same committee as Senator Burr, sold up to $6 million in stocks, including a biotech firm. My thought would be it's time to invest in biotech, not sell it off. But that's neither here nor there. Collectively, they offloaded $11 million in stocks between late January and early February, according to records seen by the Daily Beast, New York Times, and ProPublica. And that is it for this section. Shout out to Groundzero, Clyde Lewis, for this wonderful montage. It's in the Aftermath library. If you guys haven't pulled it up, these are all the sources that I use. I'll slow roll through it real quick. Some of these working live, ones I haven't gotten to yet. But thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys get something out of this.